Welcome to Faculty Voices. Chris Lombardo is Associate Director of Undergraduate Studies and lecturer in Electrical Engineering and Mechanical Engineering at Harvard University. He's also very active in the Harvard University chapter of Engineers Without Borders. Today we'll be talking about Los Sanchez water supply project in the Dominican Republic. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, June. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about some of the work that myself and our students over many years have been working on with the community of Los Sanchez for about the past 10 years.
Los Sanchez Water Project, as I understand it, is to provide gravity-fed water system to a community. You just got back from the Dominican Republic. What can you tell us about the evolution of this project? And if you want to correct me on my description, that's perfectly fine.
No, great. I think that captures, a really high level, June. The Engineers Without Borders organization, the chapter at Harvard, started working in the Dominican Republic, actually before I started at Harvard, in a community called Pinolito. When we completed our work there around 2015, we wanted to continue to use the resources and relationships we had built in the Central Dominican Republic. And the neighboring community of Los Sanchez was also interested in the types of projects that we had previously done with Pinolito. So after some initial discussions with them in going through the required due diligence, we came to agreement to work with them on what initially was a water storage and distribution project. That occurred in 2015 and 2016, the very early stages. But as we spent some initial time there learning the community needs and desires and what engineering expertise we could bring, it really expanded into a project that was not only water storage and distribution, but also supply in some cases, certainly capacity building and community organization. And for about the past 10 years, we've been working in different sectors or different sub-communities of Los Sanchez to complete those goals. On the trip that you just referred to, that myself and our team returned from, that was our third and final sector, the La Mercedes sector of Los Sanchez, where we've completed water storage systems and are looking forward to what the community plans to do with water distribution in the future.
You mentioned to me before we started the interview that there was just a big decision that was being made among the community. Could you describe that?
So a little bit about the Engineers Without Borders organization, which I've been a volunteer for over 20 years now. One of the approaches Engineers Without Borders makes to community development is we as an organization don't want our partner communities to be dependent on us forever and ever. We bring pro bono engineering, design, and construction experience, potentially some access to external funds and experts in other areas of public health, but we really partner with the community on the design and construction of a whole variety of engineering type projects. Now, the vast majority are water related because those are one of the great needs in the world. But after that construction commences and is complete, and we work with the community for the next few years to make sure there's no major design flaws, all of those built works are really the ownership of the community moving forward to operate and maintain whatever systems are constructed. And in the context of Los Sanchez, that would be water supply, storage, and distribution systems. The really exciting event that you were referring to is in this sub-community of La Mercedes, we completed water supply, a drill borehole well in 2020. And then we just recently completed water storage over the past 2 summers. These are 2 concrete storage tanks, each about 6,000 gallons or so. The next major phase of the project was going to be water distribution, not how do we get water out of the ground that is great for drinking, great for household use, and as of adequate quality standards, looking at either the US EPA or the WHO. The next step, of course, is how do we store that so community members can access it 24 hours a day? But now how do we get that to their homes? And there was a big decision point because the distribution system for La Mercedes would be really challenging from an engineering perspective. There's large elevation changes. The community is geographically spread out. And that's some of the reason that working specifically in the La Mercedes subcommunity has taken so long. It's a very challenging environment for people who are engineering volunteers, whether they're students still learning their engineering skills or our professional mentor team who all have day jobs, whether in engineering or science or other aspects of industry. So we kind of knew that this distribution system was going to take at least 3 or so years, let's call it, for our team to be able to implement. And over the years that we've been working with the community members in Los Angeles, it's been very clear that they've had the capacity and knowledge to do plumbing. They have demonstrated the capability to do maintenance or make repairs on aspects of either the water supply or storage system that have already been completed. So, in a community discussion, not only the whole community, but a subset, the water committee that manages the water systems, the community was really excited to take on the construction of the water distribution systems themselves, which enabled them not only to proceed with a much faster construction timeline than our team would have been able to provide, but it also, I think, really points to a lot of the successes in the community over the past few years. Because for them to successfully be able to take this on, they've implemented organization in their community with the water committee. They've demonstrated the capability of leading construction efforts and doing fundraising efforts within their own community. And just the capability broadly that didn't really exist 10 or so years ago. Probably some of the technical skills did, I'm sure they did. But the way the community is organized to take on these projects on their own is one of the other really important outputs we look for when we partner with communities. We don't want them to be dependent on the Engineers Without Borders organization for many years. This decision making on their part and their desire and ability to take on this is, I think, a great way to look at the community's built the capacity to do this moving forward.
We've been talking about community, 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 but could you describe to us what this community looks like? What do the people work at? Is this a project that is women driven, male driven? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Sanchez is in the central Dominican Republic. It's in the province of La Vega. The closest major city is Constanza, which is about a 20-30 minute drive from Los Sanchez. This area of the Dominican Republic is a lot different than many people think of Santo Domingo or Punta Cana or a lot of the other coastal areas. There's lots of hills, and I hesitate to say mountains, but it's a hilly area. And it's also a really agriculturally focused area. So the majority of the community members work in commercial agriculture, where of course they keep some back for their own use, but a large amount of what they grow is sold to other parts of the world, including us in the United States. It's not an arid area. It's also not a rainforest either in that sense. There's a good amount of rainfall. The soil is an area where there's great growing conditions and a 12-month growing season. So there's no like winter break like you might have in parts of North America or either the South per se. And as I said, the need was really household water needs going into it. The way that we really try to structure a lot of the projects where we can influence it is, we know that the primary users of water throughout the world, responsibility for gathering, using in the household, etc., are really women. So we try, where it is culturally appropriate, to involve women in all aspects of the decision-making process. Whether or not women may have official roles, say like on a water committee or official local government type roles, the involvement in data gathering through house-to-house surveys of water usage, what do people use water for, what's the quantity of water use, to how a water system might be implemented in the sense of not just how is water used within the home, but if commonly women are the individuals who either go and get water from communal sites, or if water is brought to an individual household property, really trying to work with the individual woman to understand what the use cases are, not just what community leaders or outspoken individuals, which are commonly men, but not always, what people say they want. It's really trying to understand what the stakeholders' desires are. And in this case, we know it's largely women. Another aspect where we try to provide a lot of suggestion and influence is, and so in the community of Los Sanchez, I've been really talking about the La Mercedes subcommunity because that's where we've been most recently doing work. But in the late 2010s, so 20 sort of 15 through 19, we were working in the other two areas, which are called El Corazón de Jesús and Altagracia. And in those two areas, they have their own water committee, and La Mercedes has its water committee. But on each water committee, we really try to provide suggestions to make sure of the 4 to 5 people that make up that water committee, there's at least one woman who's on the water committee, ideally more. Clearly, we're not the ones who vote in the community, but we share our advice on, women are the primary users of water or those who are responsible for their households. That voice really should be present in the decision-making body. And I can say successfully that on the shared water committee with El Corazon and Altagracia, I believe there's 2 women out of 5. And on the La Mercedes water committee, where there's 4 individuals, also 2 of them are women.
No, it sounds like you've done collectively a really great job of working with the community to organize itself and to empower people. But what is the role of government? Water is a right.
That's a great question. And I think it's something that is challenging for a lot of these projects around the world. When it comes to like a national or provincial or state type government, I completely agree with you. A government should be serving its citizens with water and other basic human rights. But there's clearly also a need for these projects because governments aren't serving their people. We try to work with local governments, especially sort of community level governments, whenever we're in a community, because it's a partnership. It's not a group that's coming in, plopping down some piece of infrastructure and leaving. But we also know that the individual community does not exist by itself. There's the ecosystem of state or federal governments as well. When you have to drill a well, for instance, or when you have an excavator to dig up some dirt road to bury some pipe, like in the United States, you are a group combined with the local community. We need to go to that state or that federal government to get a permit for drilling a well or digging up a road to bury pipe. So there's certainly the regulatory aspects of working with different levels of government. And in the community, local government is really a large part of helping enable that. I know this podcast is about Latin America and about the Dominican Republic, but there's also some work that we do in Kenya that I just want to touch on for a second, where in Southwest Kenya, in Migori County, we're in the process of forming a partnership with that county government. So the community of Kibon in Kenya, our team, the Harvard Engineers Without Borders team, and the Migori County government are coming at it from a 3-party process, recognizing, of course, that government should be providing basic human needs to its citizens. And in this case, the Migori County government is putting some line items for some projects or some funding for projects in Kibon. So they'll be contributing some funds, some engineering expertise or engineering services provided by the county. And we're working, of course, with the county and then the local government in the community-based organization. So in this case, it's a lot more of a 3-party process. I wish we were as successful doing that in the Dominican Republic and in La Vega. We hadn't been, but I wanted to highlight some of that work in Kenya, saying we really try to work with the local governments, because when we complete our projects, we complete our post due diligence, it's the communities and the next level of local government that's going to be operating and maintaining those systems, and having the involvement of those local governments, assuming they want to be involved, I think is really crucial for the long-term sustainability of these systems.
So when you say that the community in La Merced decided to take over the project, does that mean that you're role is gone?
Sort of. After we tie up our few construction loose ends, what our timeline is really going to look like is we're going to tentatively plan for a trip next summer. And this is to really look back on all of the construction that's been done in the totality of Los Sanchez over the past 10 years. Have we accomplished the goals that the community and us have set out to solve when we first met each other in 2015? Have the scope of construction changed from those initial meetings to now? Yes, of course it has. But have we accomplished those goals collectively? And how do we know if we've accomplished those goals? Fortunately, we've done some data collection over the years in all of the different sectors of Los Sanchez. The goal there is to not only look at the technical outcomes, and some of those might be, does a water pipe withstand a certain amount of water pressure? But you might also measure those outcomes by how much water is a family or a household consuming now as compared to before. And some might think about, well, could that be water waste? But another way to look at that is, there's secure access to water now. So if community members were not using water because they felt water insecure 10 years ago. But now or next year, the water use is up because they're in a water secure environment. That is also another telltale sign of accomplishing the goals we set out to accomplish. Health outcomes are another great one. Incidents of gastrointestinal disease, we know, have dropped in parts of the community. Yes, there's water filtration, but again, access to a higher quality of water as an input, whether or not community members choose to filter or chlorinate their water, is also a huge economic and health outcome for these projects.
What happened during COVID?
What happened during COVID? A couple different things. The Dominican Republic, like many parts of the US, had lockdowns. I don't specifically remember the details of those. I don't believe the individuals stopped running their farms, but I think there were community lockdowns where people weren't going to the city. One of the other benefits, though, that some of our partners were talking about when we were just there a couple months ago is the incidence of a lot of disease dropped because, like in the United States and in other places, there was this large public health focus on hand washing. I mean, we all know we should wash our hands, and many of us do. But during those years of COVID, I think there was an increased focus of, no, we really need to wash our hands. And that persisted throughout many parts of the world. So even then, reflecting on a couple years ago compared to now, our community members were saying that, yeah, disease was actually pretty much down because everybody was so much more careful than maybe we even are today. The other big thing for water access in Los Sanchez that occurred during COVID was access to electricity. So when we started working in Los Sanchez in the 2010s, they had power rationing, electric power rationing, like many parts of the world. So in the community of Los Sanchez, the power grid was on from 6 a.m. to noon and then 6 p.m. to midnight. So you got 2 6-hour segments of power. But through whatever decisions were made at the utility level or the federal government level in the Dominican Republic, now there's 24-hour access to electricity. But that actually also leads to being 24-hour access to water. You might say, well, why am I saying that? So the 2 deep water borehole wells that supply the community in Los Sanchez, they're run off electric pumps. So when we designed those pumping systems, we designed those storage systems, we were keeping in mind the maximum those electric pumps could run was 2 6-hour segments during the day. But if there's 24-hour electricity available, roughly that doubles the amount of water that's available because that pump can run 24 hours a day as opposed to only 12 hours a day. So that's roughly an instant double in the water supply that the community didn't previously have access to, or that's not the way the water system was designed because the 12 hours of power a day was a limitation that we had to work with in the design work.
Oh, that's really, really interesting. Was your work with Los Sanchez the first time that you were in Latin America?
So, me personally, no. I had mentioned, I think, at the top of the podcast that I've been volunteering with Engineers Without Borders for about 20 years since when I was an undergraduate. My first work in Latin America was initially in Ande in Ecuador. And then as I was in graduate school and continuing the volunteer work, it was in northern Mexico, just south of the border in Texas. But upon coming to Harvard and joining the Harvard chapter of Engineers Without Borders, they had already been working in the Dominican Republic in that first community, Pinolito, that I previously mentioned. I was there to continue the work to support the students. So I've been working in the Dominican Republic for the 12 years that I've been at Harvard, but I hadn't been to the Dominican prior to that time.
And do you have any further plans to work in Latin America now that this project is wrapping up?
Yeah, so the Harvard chapter has been working in both Latin America and East Africa for about the past 7 or 8 years. And I really like that diversity of projects, and not only for student interest, because some students are maybe more interested in Latin America, others might be more interested in East Africa. Certainly, the ability to have student teams where our students are fluent Spanish speakers is generally for Spanish speaking countries is much easier than say in East Africa where Swahili or a smaller tribal language might be the prominent language. But also I think that the proximity to the United States, whether it's, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, resonates with some of our volunteers a lot more. Like, we know that when we hop on a plane to the Dominican Republic, it's 3 or 4 hours away. Or if we were to work in Guatemala, it would be something similar, for example. Whereas when our team works in East Africa, it's an 8 hour flight to Europe and then another 8 hour flight to East Africa, and then maybe a bus ride or a van ride that's another day long. It takes me 2, 3 days to get to the community, whereas at least Los Sanchez and Pinolito, when we're in the Dominican Republic, we could hop on a plane in the early morning and by afternoon or evening be in the community. So there's a great convenience to working in places that are closer to home. Also, because it provides the ability to have more frequent FaceTime. We can visit the community 2 or maybe 3 times a year. Whereas that is much harder when the distance is much further away and the travel time is much further away and the cost is much greater.
So I was asking if when the project wraps up, do you have any particular plans to keep on working in Latin America?
So, short answer, yes. Long answer is as our Los Sanchez team is starting to ramp down, we're still providing some items to Los Sanchez over the next coming year. We're thinking about how do we evaluate the project. Another thing that team is going to be doing is saying, where do we want to work next? Engineers Without Borders USA as an organization has either in-country offices or close partners in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and Bolivia. And there's great benefits to working with some of those very close partners. So I can't say for sure where we'll end up, but there's a strong, I think, desire to continue in Latin America. Again, I can't tell you where. Part of that is on the team to think about where do we want to work and why? What are the pros and cons? What are the communities that have applied to Engineers Without Borders for projects? But I would say that those 4 countries, due to the partnerships that exist with the national organization of Engineers Without Borders, are pretty low hanging fruit.
That's great. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
One thing I always like to bring up is the title of the organization is Engineers Without Borders. We are doing infrastructure work, but one of the most important things about these community infrastructure and community development projects is it goes well, well, well beyond engineering. If there are students or volunteers can come from a whole wide variety of backgrounds, that if the work interests you, don't feel concerned that you might not have an engineering or STEM background, that there's economics, public health, medicine, government, business, all the STEM fields, that we really encourage volunteers regardless of your discipline. That if you have interest in the work, there is a home for you in the organization. And I'm speaking from from the Harvard chapter perspective, but if you're listening from anywhere else in the United States or the world, there is likely an Engineers Without Borders chapter near you. You could go to the Engineers Without Borders website. There's student chapters located at universities. You don't need to be a student to volunteer with the students. There's also professional chapters located in cities or portions of states. If there is any interest, I really encourage you to reach out to wherever your local chapter is, as we're always looking for volunteers who are passionate about this type of work.
You've been listening to Faculty Voices. Chris Lombardo is Associate Director of Undergraduate Studies and lecturer in Electrical Engineering and Mechanical Engineering at Harvard. He's very active in the Harvard University chapter of Engineers Without Borders. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Chris.
Thank you, June. This has been great. Hopefully we can follow up again in the future.